Hello, this is Congress, Section B lecture. Our Prioritized Standards Government Civics 15. Objectively, we're going to analyze the powers of the U.S. Congress. The Constitution granted Congress several enumerated powers. And by enumerated powers, these are powers granted explicitly in the specific wording of the Constitution, meaning there is wording somewhere that specifically tells you this. Congress has several enumerated powers dealing with money and commerce, meaning business. For instance, the Appropriations Clause, which is found in Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7. This gives Congress the power of the purse, meaning that federal money cannot be spent or appropriated without the consent of Congress. So if you want federal money, you have to have Congress's approval. Also, the Commerce Clause, which is found in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, this ensures that only Congress can regulate business between nations and the states. Although states can still regulate business, that does not cross state lines, but once business crosses state lines, Congress is in control of that. Congress also has the power to grant copyrights, which is the exclusive legal right of a person to reproduce, publish, and sell his or her own literary, musical, or artistic creations. And also they can grant patents, which is a license issued to the inventor, granting the exclusive right to manufacture, use, or sell his or her invention for a limited period of time. So they are related to each other. Additionally, Congress has the power to tax, although they cannot actually tax exports, but they do tax most everything else. They can borrow money, which they do often. They coin money and also regulate its value, and then they can also punish against counterfeiting of that money. And they can establish bankruptcy laws. Now, Congress has enumerated military powers. For instance, only Congress can declare war. Also, Congress has the power to raise and support armed forces, so they determine the funding and how many people we need in the Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force. That's basically up to Congress. Congress has the enumerated power to acquire, manage, and dispose of various federal lands, which establishes the concept of eminent domain. And by eminent domain, this is the power of the government to take private property for public use. However, the Fifth Amendment actually limits eminent domain by guaranteeing that private property will not be taken without just compensation. So if the government comes to take your land, they still can, but they have to give you what's considered just compensation, i.e., pay you for your land. Congress has other legislative enumerated powers. For instance, they have foreign relations power, which is due in part to its war powers, also its regulation of foreign trade, and additionally its role in the confirmation of officials and approval of treaties. Congress also has a power to establish and regulate the postal services, and they have a power to establish laws for immigration and naturalization. Congress also exercises several implied powers that are not directly given to it by the Constitution, but rather through the necessary and proper clause to the Constitution, which is found in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18. So the necessary and proper clause, this says that Congress may make laws that are necessary and proper for carrying out all of the other powers it was granted. Sometimes this is referred to as the elastic clause because basically this clause is very vague. So vague that it can actually be used to stretch to encompass virtually any action that's not already enumerated to Congress through the Constitution. In McCulloch versus Maryland of 1819, the Supreme Court ruled in a 7-0 decision that the Constitution granted implied powers, which solidified the expansive power of Congress. If you're curious about the specifics of this case, the question was if the government had powers other than those expressly given to it by the Constitution. More specifically, could Congress or could the federal government charter a bank, meaning create a bank? And also, were state governments allowed to tax those banks created by the federal government? Answers to those questions, yes, federal government can create banks. No, states are not allowed to tax those banks. The Constitution gave Congress non-legislative powers which often serve as checks against the other branches of the government. For instance, the House of Representatives has the sole power of impeachment, or the formal process for bringing charges of wrongdoing against government officials, which can be used against government officials that may have committed treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors through a majority vote by House members. So this is similar to the concept of a grand jury deciding if charges will be brought or not. After being impeached by the House, the case is actually tried in the Senate, with the senators acting as the jury, with a two-thirds majority required to remove a government official from office, which is considered like a conviction in a normal trial. Now, the Vice President actually presides over impeachment proceedings, acting as the judge, except in certain cases. And those would be cases where the President is being impeached, or possibly the Vice President is being impeached. And in those instances, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court actually will preside over impeachment proceedings. Now, impeachment actually serves as a check against wrongdoing by both officials in the executive and judicial branches. Additionally, it can be used against members that are in Congress too. The Senate has executive powers dealing with appointments to office and treaties made by the President. All major presidential appointments, including executive or cabinet positions, federal judges, and ambassadors, must actually be confirmed by the Senate by a majority vote. The appropriate standing committee will hold hearings to decide if they will give a favorable recommendation to the full Senate. After that takes place, the full Senate either votes up or down. Most of the time, if there's a recommendation, then that person gets the position. Also, treaties made by the President must be passed by a two-thirds majority of the senators that are present. So, Senate may actually reject the treaty, accept the treaty. They can offer amendments to a treaty, reservations to a treaty, or possibly what are called understandings to a treaty. So they have technically several options that they can use. Congress has additional powers that serve as checks on the executive branch. For instance, Congress has the power of oversight, or the power to review, monitor, and supervise the other parts of the government, where it can investigate the actions, programs, and policies of the executive branch and federal agencies. A presidential veto may be overridden by a two-thirds majority of both houses of Congress. Congress also has powers that serve as checks on the judicial branch. For instance, Congress has the power to create all federal courts inferior or below the Supreme Court, and also to structure the federal judiciary. Congress has the power to establish the jurisdiction of courts, i.e., determine what cases they're actually allowed to hear. Congress also has the power to define federal crimes and also the punishments for violation of those laws. Also, Congress has the power to alter the size of the Supreme Court. Generally speaking, 9 is the custom, but it actually could be changed at the discretion of Congress. We have had different numbers over the years. I think it's been as high as 10 and as low as, I think, 5. Congress has the power to propose amendments to the Constitution with a two-thirds majority of both houses of Congress, which actually serves as a way to limit court decisions that it might agree with, or potentially executive actions they might agree with also. So this can be used as a tool to limit executive orders and other actions Congress disagrees with. This process was discussed more in depth in the Principles of American Government Unit lectures. Congress also has a few electoral powers, which are rarely, if ever, used. The 12th Amendment states that if the Electoral College fails to select a president and a vice president, then the House, voting by states, chooses the president, and the Senate, voting individually, chooses the vice president. So in the 1824 election, this was the last time that the Electoral College did not choose a president, and it actually went to the House of Representatives to determine who the president was going to be. Also, the 25th Amendment states that if there is a vice presidential vacancy, both houses of Congress must approve the president's vice presidential nomination by a simple majority vote. Now, prior to this amendment, there was actually no way to fill a vacancy in the vice presidency, so Gerald Ford actually became the first vice president that was sworn in using this provision. All right, that concludes Congress Section B lecture. Our prioritized standard was Government Civics 15. Objectively, now you can analyze the powers of the U.S. Congress.